Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm just going to give it a few more minutes. We let some others join in. Can everyone hear me okay? We have a chat on the right-hand side if you want to type things out as we go. Great. Thanks, Stuart. Hi, Samuel. Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Lots of highs. So we're just going to wait one more minute, give it a little bit more time. That's fine. Just us on camera today, Martin. No worries. You guys have the chat to go with. Great. So I guess people keep joining in, but we'll be good to start. So thank you for joining us today. We're going to be presenting a webinar on Solargraf. And today it's not really necessarily a highlight of any specific feature. We're going to be going through a full A to Z. So you'll be able to see everything Solargraf can offer and what it can do as of today. George is going to be going through the demo today. And Alex, that is fine. Yes, the recording will be going out. So anybody that needs to jump or doesn't make it in full, don't worry. We'll send out an email covering everything that we're going on over today. No problem. So just a bit of an introduction then. You'll be hearing my voice first. I'm Andrew. I'm a senior sales executive with Solargraf. I've been here for about 4 years now. Primarily handle the West Coast. So if you're in California or any of the West Coast states, you'll primarily speak with me. If we haven't already spoken, you're going to reach out after the fact. I'll probably be your first contact. So nice to meet you all. George is our Senior Director of Product at Solargraf. He's the product lead behind most of the design tool features you'll see today. And like I said, he'll be hosting the demo and doing the presentation. He's our expert here on pretty much everything there is. A couple of things to review. I guess we'll go through the agenda today. So I'm going to do a quick overview of Solargraf in a couple of these slides. I'll run a quick poll question. George is going to handle the live demo, and then we'll handle a Q&A session where anybody that has questions. So if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. But if you can, we'll go through them at the end of the demo. Makes the flow a little quicker and easier for us. Awesome. So just to kind of explain what Solargraf is for anybody that hasn't seen it or knows nothing about it right now, we are a design and proposal software tool primarily. You can see a few of our highlights here. We emphasize on accuracy and certifications. We've been getting approved from NYSERDA, NREL, the California CCE Commission was just approved as well. We pride ourselves on being able to customize your proposals and what you're able to do in Solargraf. So it's not just tied down to what we're offering. We want everybody to be able to make it their own as well. A lot of integrations, DocuSign, financing options, an open API, and a database with HJs, material lists, which makes life a lot easier when setting up an account. It's not necessarily filling everything out. It's just choosing what you're actually going to need. Outside of the design tool, which is what you'll see George present today, we also have our on-demand proposal services. So in the event that we are in certain countries in EU, Martin, yes. So we'll go over that where we are in a little bit. So outside of the design proposal, if you feel that Solargraf is not something that you can see yourself utilizing, if you're not that tech savvy or need a little more help, we do have on-demand proposal services where you can actually order quotes. You'll be able to go ahead and place an order. Just let us know the materials you want to use, an address. We'll put it together for you and have it ready the next day. And we also have on-demand permit services. So anybody needing engineering or plan sets to submit, you'll be able to order plan sets through us. So an all-in-one, really, we want to be a tool that presents everything and all of your needs here. Just taking a look at Solargraf in itself. So Martin, I see Bhavani answered you in the chat here as well, but just to get a glance. So where we stand, we've now created, we're at the 2.1 million proposals created on Solargraf, over 1 million permit designs. We're at over 2,000 individual customers, which consists of 7,500 users utilizing Solargraf as of right now. And as Bhavani mentioned in the chat, we are now in 5 countries with 5 languages supported on our proposals. So we're going global, expanding. Not yet in Swiss yet, but we'll probably get there eventually. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a quick poll here. We just want to kind of gather a little bit more information from everyone here to understand what type of design tool you're using currently, if you're already familiar or using Solargraf, or if you're on a different tool. Please take a minute just to answer our poll if you can. Great, so a few Solargraf users already. I see a couple Aurora and others. Feel free to use the chat as well. If you're using something else, type it out so that we could get an understanding. Great, we appreciate that. We appreciate the answers coming in. All right, and so what we'll do at this point, so like I said, as George is going to take over, he's going to be doing a full presentation today. So if you have questions, throw them in the chat. Myself and Bhavani will try and get to the chat questions as we go through it. We are going to have a Q&A right after the session as well, where we could jump into a little more detail on questions or revert to showing certain features if you have questions as well. Great. If anything else, George, if you would like to take over from here.
Certainly, yeah. Thank you very much, Andrew, and thanks everyone for being here today. I'm going to steal the screen share. Let me just make sure I can share the right window. You should see a project list. Are we seeing that okay, Andrew?
Not seen it yet. There we go.
Okay, we're in. Very good. Cool. Yeah, so thanks again, Andrew. Thanks for being here, guys. We're going to focus on our 3D design tool today, everybody. So we'll probably run through creating a project from start to finish. We can take a quick look at the proposal, the output of that design, which you can share with prospective customers. If there's time, I might come back and have a look at some of the newer cases that are handled in Solargraf, things like expanding an existing PV system, which we know is an increasingly common use case. So as Andrew said, please throw your questions in the chat and we'll answer those as we go. So on my screen, you see the project list. This is, I suppose, like a mini CRM inside Solargraf. So it's a way for you to look at all the projects that you've created. You can filter these, you can search for a specific project or just see various data points around them. And this is also where we would start a new project. So for those that haven't used Solargraf before, a project loosely relates to an address or a customer. And really the address is the first thing we need. And from there, we can create multiple designs and present those on one proposal. So starting with the new project button up here, we'll begin by entering the address. As I say, that is the first thing we need And that gives us a lot of information that we'll be using later in the project. Do note, as Andrew mentioned, you can connect Solargraf to your CRM or any other tool that you use via the API. A lot of Solargraf users today will be using something like Salesforce or HubSpot and so on. You can actually have a button inside that CRM that would say create Solargraf project from this opportunity. And if you're doing it that way, you will obviously have the address and potentially the customer's information pre-populated for you. Today, we're just going to run through the case where you're starting this process from within Solargraf itself. And in that case, you can enter the customer's contact details now, or you can save that for later. The address is really the only thing we need. From there, we'll move on to what we call the pre-design page. So this page just gives us a moment to confirm some of the key details that we need to make sure that the design we create is as informed as possible. So simple things like if it's a residential or commercial property, that's going to have an impact on utility settings as well as incentives, which incentives are available. You also have what we call a service type. So you can either create the design as we will today, or you could order that proposal and actually have us at Enphase design that for you. And there's also the concept of a system type, which we'll look at a little later. For now, we'll presume that this is a new system. This person doesn't have solar today. So more often than not, there's really nothing for you to do here, but just be aware that you can define those settings ahead of time. Next big thing to look at on this page is the imagery. We use Nearmap in North America, which is pretty much the highest quality imagery you can find. Occasionally in rural areas, you may be using a Google image. Obviously, that will be pre-selected for you if that's the best available image. You can also upload your own image to design within Solargraf. So if you have, let's say, blueprints for a new construction project, you can upload those. If you've flown a drone over the property and you want to use a drone image, you could do that as well. In this case, it's an existing structure and Nearmap do have data there. So we'll use this image. And the last thing we really want to look at is the property's consumption. So you'll notice that Solargraf automatically identifies the utility and tariff for that property. And in this example, because we're in Southern California, you'll notice that the post-solar tariff is identified automatically as NEM 3.0. So that means any future interactions with the grid for this system we're designing will be on the NEM 3.0 billing, grid connection type, essentially. From there, we'll need to enter some consumption data. We want to know approximately how much energy this home consumes, and that will help us to design an appropriate system. If you have actual usage, this is known as green button data in the US, you can select that option. You can choose the format that you'd like to supply that information in, and then you can browse and upload a file. More often than not, especially at an early stage when you're just preparing a first design or a first proposal for a customer, you may not have that data to hand. So in that case, you can simply estimate it. There's many ways we can estimate consumption. If you have a specific bill with a start and end date and either a dollar amount or a kilowatt hour amount, you can enter that here. Otherwise, we could stick with maybe, let's say, an annual average. So I'll just say, I think this home consumes about 8,000 kilowatt hours annually, for example. Now, where we're estimating the consumption, and we've just given Solargraf one annual value, Solargraf will help us by distributing those 8,000 kilowatt hours across each calendar month. And it does that by looking at similar consumption patterns for other properties on this tariff. So it's considering things like the climate in that area, for example. Now, if we go one layer further, we can also define what's called a consumption profile. And this helps us to understand if we take the consumption from any given day, how is that consumption distributed across each hour of the day? Are they consuming more in the morning, more in the evening, and so on? So there's a whole host of kind of standard consumption profiles. I could choose maybe a household with school kids. I could create my own profiles if I'm working with customers routinely who have very specific consumption patterns. But you'll be familiar with this graph. There's a big peak in the morning and then a bit of a lull during the day when most people are out of the house, and then a larger peak in the evening. Now, one other thing to consider as well is we can also consider additional heavy loads. And the use case for this is kind of twofold, really. If we're looking to add a battery to this system, which we'll look at later today, we'll want to make sure that all of the really big loads in the home are identified so that we have the appropriate power requirements for those loads. But also we can take a look into the future and have a look at how additional loads may be added and what their impact is on consumption. So for example, let's imagine that this home doesn't today have an electric vehicle, but they're looking to purchase one in the short-term future. And they obviously want the system, the PV system and the battery system to be designed with that EV in mind. So here we can select the make. I'll just say it's a Rivian, whatever it is, the RS1250, why not? We can also estimate how many miles that vehicle will be driven per day. And using the specs of this model and the number of miles it's driven per day, we can estimate pretty accurately how many additional kilowatt hours of consumption that will mean. So it's 4.2 kilowatt hours per day. I'm going to uncheck this box to say it's not included in the 8,000 kilowatt hours that I estimated earlier. And once we do that, you'll see a new part of this graph is added, which shows that additional consumption. It's this yellow portion here. And for the moment, we assume that the electric vehicle will be charged kind of off peak hours when the rest of the loads in the home are not using so much energy. So quick recap, enter an address, just make sure you're happy that it's resi or commercial, make sure you're happy with the image, and then enter as much information as you can on consumption as possible. Do note that all of those details can be changed later. So you don't have to have the final answers here, but again, if we have a little bit of information now, it will help us to create an informed design. So we'll just let the software run the numbers and it's going to open up the design tool. At this stage, your project is created. So if you did want to step away and do something else or go make yourself a coffee, your work up to now is going to be saved and you can come back and find that later from the project list where we started. Now, we've landed in the design tool and this is really the focus of today's call. I'm going to focus on roof, solar and battery design today. We're not going to look so much at electrical design. That's primarily around generating a single line diagram and actually a full permit set. We'll certainly cover that in future sessions. And if you're really interested, you can always talk to Andrew and my other colleagues after today to learn more about electrical design. But for today, we're focused on roof, solar and battery. In roof design, there are two steps essentially. The first is going to be to trace the roof in 2D. And the second step will be to render that 2D outline as a 3D model. So starting over here on the pen tool, this is where we draw in the roof facets. If you select that, you'll see an option labeled detect roof outline. And what that essentially does is it runs a computer vision algorithm that will look at this image and try to find the outline of the roof, the perimeter, as well as all of the internal roof edges, the hips and the valleys and ridge and so on. So you can see it's done a pretty good job there on this main structure. Now, if you have a second structure, like we have this little garage in the background, in the backyard here, if you wanted to add that in, you could. Very simple. Just simply trace around the perimeter. And then from there, you can divide the facets. So we'll just trace over the hips, add our ridge line, and then those two hips on the east-facing side, like so. So now we have a completed outline for both structures. We can next select what we call the wizard. And the wizard runs a series of algorithms that will convert the 2D outline into a 3D model. So specifically, what we're doing here is we're combining the shapes of each of these roof facets in 2D with the LiDAR data, which is 3D data. It gives us the elevation of each of the objects within that image. And that helps us to get the pitch of the roof, so the angle of the roof relative to the ground, as well as the azimuth of each roof facet. And we define the azimuth in Solargraf as the direction in which that roof facet faces relative to north. So if a roof facet faces due north, it will have a 0-degree azimuth. If it faces due south, it will have a 180-degree azimuth. And combining those shapes that we see in 2D with that LiDAR data gives us this beautiful 3D model where all of the facets face in the desired direction. The wizard actually did a couple of extra things for us. It's detected the obstructions on the roof. So that's using the similar computer vision technology. We're looking at the image and we're looking for small areas of that image that look slightly different to the rest of the roof. Those must be obstructions. So things like chimneys and so on, HVAC units. The other thing it's done as well is found the trees. So again, it started by looking for trees in the 2D image, and then it's using that 3D data to estimate the shape and height of those trees. So essentially you end up with a full, we can call it a site model, the roof and the surrounding area, with only 2 clicks. Now over on the left-hand side, we do have what we call the split screen. And this feature is used to verify that your model is correct. So we divide the window into 2 halves, if you like. On the right-hand side, you have your model, and on the left, you have 3D imagery courtesy of Google. And you can rotate that imagery, and you can rotate your model. And really, we're just taking a moment here to check that the roof has come out correctly, that there are no facets or trees or obstructions that have been missed. And once we're happy with that, we can close off our split screen, and essentially you're done with roof design. Now, I should add, before we move on to solar, you do have the opportunity to add your own obstructions, to add your own trees. You can also select any given object, whether it's a roof facet or an obstruction or a tree, and then edit its properties. For example, if you knew that you intended to trim back or cut down one of these trees prior to installing the system, it's better to make that change here in Solargraf. We really only need to see the site as it will be when the system is commissioned. So that's it for roof design. I'll move over to solar design now. And there's a couple of different ways to approach the solar design, but a lot of users I work with will begin by running what we call the shading wizard. It's that first icon in the left side menu. And what that does is it takes a local weather file and it simulates the sun passing over this model at that exact location. And it helps us to calculate shading data for every pixel on that roof for every hour of the year. There are 3 types of shading data that essentially 2 types of shading data that we calculate. The first we refer to as SAV, that's the solar access value. And that describes as a percentage how much sun actually does hit this part of the roof that could, owing to things like trees and obstructions. So essentially, what is the impact of the shadows that are cast by other objects nearby? That's SAV. So if at no point in the year there's a shadow on any given point, let's say over here, the SAV will be 100%. Obviously, that's very rarely the case. The other thing we look at is called the tilt and orientation factor. And again, that's a percentage, and it describes how optimal is this roof facet compared with ideal conditions, given its tilt, so its angle with the ground, and its orientation. So in the Northern Hemisphere, where I am, south-facing roofs will produce more energy than north-facing roofs. So due south, 180 degrees, that's 100% for the orientation factor. The tilt, or the optimal tilt, I should say, is equal to the, I think it's the longitude, sorry, the distance away from the equator, essentially. And again, you can't change the pitch of the roof more often than not, but we will calculate how optimal that is, or how much that varies from the perfect conditions. So let's say the tilt and the orientation relative to north or south is expressed here as a percentage. And actually, if we just hover our cursor over this facet down here on the garage south facing, we can see that it's got a 98% SAV, so very little shadows cast there. And it also has a 98% TOF, so it's almost a perfect place to put solar. Now, the last thing we look at is called TSRF, or the total solar resource fraction. And to do this, all we do is multiply SAV and TOF together. 2 percentages multiplied together equal a new percentage. And that really is the best metric that we can use to determine how suitable any particular part of the roof is for solar production. So again, we calculate these for every pixel on the roof for every hour of the year, and then we annualize those annual values and we express them here in the heat map. So the colors that you see are the TSRF across the full year. Brighter shades like a white or a bright yellow denote a very high TSRF. This is a great place to put solar modules. And the darker shades, the oranges and the purples, denote a lower TSRF. So ideally, we want to avoid those areas if possible, if we're looking to maximize production per module. Many of you probably know everything I've just explained, so apologies to those who are already very familiar with this. But the idea is essentially if you're looking at a roof and you're not entirely sure, say, what the impact is of these trees, you can always run that shading wizard, and that gives you a pretty good indication of certainly which areas to prioritize or which areas to avoid. If you're like me and you do this all day and you know that south facing or west facing away from the trees is the place to go, you can obviously skip that step. The next thing to consider is setbacks. So, in most jurisdictions across the US, there are rules that say you have to stay a certain distance away from certain parts of the roof. So, for example, this little edge here is called a ridge, and then these diagonal edges are called hips. You've also got a little valley down here, and you've got some eaves at the perimeter. So each jurisdiction will have different rules. It can be a bit of a headache when you're looking at design tools to figure out exactly which rules there are and which areas you need to avoid. Solargraf takes care of all of that. We have a very extensive database of jurisdictions. These are known as AHJs. And we keep a record of what the setbacks are per AHJ. So we know the address, we know that this is in San Diego, and we know that in San Diego, they want us to stay 18 inches away from any hips or valleys, as well as 18 inches away from any ridge. But if our PV system occupies more than a third of the roof surface, they actually want us to stay 36 inches away from the ridge. So again, that's done for you. You can create your own setback rules if you like, but generally we don't recommend it because we take great care in updating that database on your behalf. So very little for you to do there, but one of the benefits, I guess, of a 3D design tool is that we do actually know this is an eave and this is a ridge and this is a hip. So for the average user trying to create a quote for a customer, your first step may well be to add panels to the roof. And we can do this in one of two ways. I'm going to start with what we call the Smart Designer. And really what this aims to do is to take a lot of the guesswork out of the panel placement process. So we can select that option. There are 3 use cases here. We've got a max fit, which will just maximize the roof space, place panels everywhere it can. We also have the bill optimized panel placement. So this will design a system that is optimized to reduce the utility, reduce the bill essentially. And we also have the consumption offset panel placement. So that's a system that will be designed to offset a certain percentage of whatever the home consumes today. So we'll start with the bill optimized panel placement. So here you'll see a dialog where you can choose your hardware. Let's say we use whatever panel we like. We can use the IQ8 plus inverter. I'm in California. I know that batteries are going to help me to drive down the utility bill. So I'm going to choose the Enphase IQ5P for this system. And then from there, I can choose my orientation. Some installers have a preference to only install in portrait or only in landscape, or they don't really care. We can also choose things like our spacing, if that varies from whatever we use now in our company defaults. And the last thing we really need to define is what is the target bill offset that we're trying to achieve. So in this particular part of California, and actually most of the US, you'll probably never offset 100% of your customer's bill. They will likely have some kind of minimum connection fee or something like that. That means the bill will never be 100% bill offset. We generally say between around 80 and 90% is a really good target. If you get above 90%, you've done a great job and you have very favorable utility conditions. So I'll stick with 80 for now. I'll hit proceed. And here what the software does is it will begin by max fitting the roof. It will place panels everywhere it can. And then it will remove modules one by one, starting with those that produce the least, until we arrive at a system that achieves that 80% bill offset. And actually, in this case, because we're in NEM 3.0 territory, it will recommend some batteries to help us get there. So you can see in this example, it's obviously prioritized the south-facing facets because those produce very well. And it's also using some of this west-facing area as well. And quite handily for this particular customer, we've stayed away from the front of the house, so these aren't visible from the road. So up in the top right here, we have what we call the data dialog. And this box is designed to give you as much information as possible about your design. So simple things like how many modules or panels you have, what type of inverter you have, as well as what your home's current consumption is. Note that this value here, 9,533, that includes the EV I added on top of the 8,000 we started with. And then you've also got things like your production, your consumption offset, and your bill offset. So with a 6.44 kilowatt system only, we're able to produce 108% of what the home consumes. But that only translates into a, let's say, 60% bill offset, which is totally expected in NEM 3.0 conditions. In order to get that bill offset higher to our 80% target, we're going to need to use some batteries. And in this case, Solargraf is recommending two 5Ps, a 10 kilowatt hour system that will drive the bill offset from approximately 60% to above 80. Now, it is normal for that bill offset to vary slightly from what you've asked for. We asked for 80%, we got 81.2, just because we can't recommend half a battery, right? I mean, N-phase batteries are quite modular. That's one of the big advantages, but they're not that modular. So in this case, I'm going to add the battery to my design. You'll see that added to our data dialog down here. And at this stage, really, unless there are specific changes we want to make, our design is complete. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to close that menu for you for a moment. And I just want to show you an alternative method for designing this system. It may be, for example, that you don't like that the system has combined portrait and landscape, or there may be some other kind of aesthetic issue with this design, and you want to have a bit more control about exactly where the modules go. So just for the sake of being complete with the demo, we'll just clear all of our work in Solar so far. And do note on the left-hand side, you have this add panel icon, and that will open up a very similar menu to what we saw earlier, where we can choose our hardware. But here you have actual complete control over where the modules go. So if we use the auto mode, we're just clicking once, that's going to place the panels. Or we can use the manual mode, which allows us to place modules sort of one by one. We can just click here, or we can even kind of click and drag to fill, a portion of that facet. I mean, these are relatively small roof facets, probably don't need to use the manual mode in that example. So as I say, you do have complete control over exactly where the modules go. So if I wanted to stick with portrait, for example, let's just delete this one. We could have something like that. Now, slightly more modules than we had there last time. System's probably going to be slightly overestimated. So at that point, we may need to come back and remove certain modules. And this is one of the advantages of using the Smart Designer, is that it reduces the need for you to kind of trial and error with your layout, especially if you have a certain, say, consumption offset in mind. Now, one of the other things I want to quickly touch on is the concept of PCS, Power Control System. And this is a relatively new innovation from Enphase. And essentially, it's a software feature of the hardware, if that makes sense, which allows you to curtail production to avoid a main panel upgrade. There's a lot of instances, especially in California, again, where you have quite an old main panel. It can't take all of the energy that's being produced by the system. We still want to install a large system for now. But we want to make sure that we're not forced to upgrade that main panel. So once you have modules placed on the roof and you have a production value estimated, you can come to the top right here where we see Power Control System. And here you have a couple of ways to kind of determine whether this is required or not. So you can use the current limit using the NEC 120 rule. All we need in this case is the bus bar rating, breaker rating for the main panel. So I'm just going to drop these numbers a little lower. And you can see in that example, this system actually will exceed the power control limits of that main panel. It would require an MPU, which is, I think, several $1,000s at least. So in that case, we would enable PCS, and that means that we don't need to worry about the main panel. We can keep the existing one, but obviously our production will be somewhat curtailed. And actually, we can get a better idea of how much that's curtailed by selecting this little question mark icon. So you can see in this case, without PCS, we're producing 13,109. With PCS enabled, it's 12,816. So we're only losing 2% of our production. In this case, I would say actually enabling PCS is much better. We lose 2% production, but we get to keep the existing main panel. So hopefully that gives you a better sense of sort of how we get the modules on there, using the Smart Designer potentially to automate our battery design for us, and also looking at PCS considerations as well. Now, a couple of other things I want to touch before we look at battery design, because we haven't been in there yet. We've got a downloads menu over on the right-hand side here. There's two main sort of downloads that I'll talk about here. The first one is the roof report. Very often you'll have a customer who wants to get solar, but their roof is quite old or it's in bad repair. And the roof needs to be repaired before we put an Enphase Micro with a 25-year warranty on that roof. Whether you do roofing yourself, you may have an internal roofing department, you may have a partner that you work with locally. Someone will need to get a roof report to essentially price the cost of replacing that roof. Mostly the things that you need to know are what's called the squares, so the size of the roof in square feet, as well as things like its pitch. And then generally roofers will want to know how much eave, ridge, valley, hip, rake, and flashing we have. All these different parts of the roof require different material, and we need all those details to give an accurate price. These roof reports are available from many places. You're usually looking at around $50 to $100 per report. You're probably going to wait about 24 business hours to get that back. Given that we've already taken the time to build this beautiful 3D model in Solargraf for the purpose of our solar design, it would be remiss not to also take advantage of that sort of free, instantly generated roof report. So that's one really nice advantage that a lot of our customers are benefiting from as they start to adopt the 3D design tool. The other one I wanted to touch on just quickly is the shade report. This is something that a lot of your financing partners will look for. Even some incentive bodies actually require shade reports. I know of one out in New York State who will only pay out their incentive if they can be sure that the system has, I think, over 80% SAV on average. So a couple of different reasons why this might be needed, but essentially what this document does is it gives you all of the shading data. We'll just wait for that to load for a moment, but it will give you the SAV, TOF, TSRF for each array, and then a weighted average for the system at large. But also what this allows you to do is, if you share this over with your financing partner, you can share it via email. It allows that person to independently verify that your design is accurate, that you haven't, for example, forgotten to add that huge tree in the backyard, or that you haven't conveniently missed all of these obstructions that might cause some shade. So this is available in a web version like we see here that can be shared out, or you can download a PDF. It's really up to you. But again, those are two, I'd say, documents that this 3D tool generates that our older 2D tool does not, and that have proved to be quite popular for today's Solargraf users. So I'm a little conscious of time. I'm going to keep moving if I may. We're going to touch the battery design next. So again, if you've used the Smart Designer, you've probably already got your recommendation for batteries. You can probably skip this. But if you've decided to place the panels manually exactly where you want them and you've calculated production for those, you will then want to proceed to the battery design tool. And in here, it's pretty straightforward, really. We just want to know which manufacturer do you want to work with. Obviously, it's Enphase, but if ever it weren't, you can see there's quite an exhaustive list of other manufacturers that are supported in Solargraf. Sometimes a manufacturer will have multiple product ranges, so you may need to select exactly which range you want to work with. And then from there, there's just a few other basic inputs. Do you want this to be grid tied, or do you want to support backup? What's the savings, or what's the mode, sorry, that you're gonna put that battery in? Are you prioritizing savings? Are you looking more for self-consumption? And once you've confirmed those details, you can ask Solargraf to build you the system. And here, what it will do is it will look at all the possible configurations for the Enphase 5P. So a few of the popular ones might be 1 5P, 2 5Ps, 3 5Ps. And then it will show you what the impact is by adding each of these different configurations versus having a solar-only system. So we're looking at things like ROI, payback, how much of the bill is going to be offset. And Solargraf will also make a recommendation. In this case, it's 2 5Ps that gives us a very nice bill offset, a pretty decent ROI as well. Now, the payback is a little bit longer there, but that's because the majority of the savings are going to come later during the project life, right? We're looking at a 25-year project here. So once you're happy with your battery design, you can save your changes. And from there, your design essentially is done. Do keep in mind you can clone this design. You can make minor changes if you want to use maybe a different panel, if you want to have a larger system, smaller system, if you want to have maybe solar only or solar plus battery. You can create as many designs as you want, and you can present, I think, up to 4 designs for each customer. So I am, as I say, a little conscious of time. I want to make sure we have proper time for our Q&A. But what I'm going to do, just for those who haven't used Solargraf, because I think the majority of people here today are not using Solargraf, I do just want to give you a quick view of the proposal, the output, just so you've got a better sense of where that data goes. So the proposal it comes in 2 forms. We have a web version. We highly recommend to use the web version. It allows you to make changes in real time, but you can download a PDF at any moment should you wish. At a high level, the proposal is broken up into what we call sections. Some of these are pretty standard sections that you would expect in any solar proposal. So we can talk a bit about the design or the pricing or the materials, savings. You can also create your own sections. We have a lot of people who will have an About Us section where they talk a bit more about their company and what makes them different or better. We often have people showcasing previous projects, especially if you're doing something that's maybe out of the ordinary. Let's say you want to do a ground mount system on a farm. Your customer may want to see other examples, maybe photos or videos of similar projects that you've completed in the past. You can really create any content you want here, videos, images, text. You can also show and hide various sections. It may be, for example, that, I don't know, materials is not that important to you. And you can also reorder these. Some people like to start with pricing nice and front and center. Some people kind of keep that for the end when they've already sold the value and the savings and so on. So just be aware that everything on this quote, from the fonts and the colors and the images, as well as the content and the structure, is fully customizable by you. One other thing I want to just quickly touch on is since this is a 3D design webinar, is the ability to actually showcase that 3D design to your customer. This is a really, really nice feature. It really helps to bring that project to life for the customer. It's much better than just showing them a 2D screenshot of their house with panels on it. If you're doing a battery quote, you'll also be able to see an example of what that battery hardware might look like superimposed on a wall, either an outdoor wall or an indoor wall. You can also choose whatever data you want to show down here, whether it's system size, production, blurb around the materials, lots of flexibility in terms of what you show to customers. You can also simulate various financing scenarios. So we can have a cash deal, any number of loan options, leases, PPAs. I don't have a lease here, but that is supported. It's pretty straightforward. We have a very robust pricing module in Solargraf. Any kind of adders, discounts, you can have them hidden. You can have them called out as a separate line item here. You can have incentives listed here. I think we have the federal tax credit. I'm not quite sure. Sorry, why that's not there. That should be there. Let's just quickly check. Bear with me. There we go. Let's activate that. Sorry, I think I'd had to disable it for a call I was on earlier. But all of the incentives are there in Solargraf. If ever you come across an incentive that is relatively new and not supported in Solargraf, please contact us. We'll be more than happy to add it at short notice. So again, I won't bore you with all the details of the proposal, but just wanted to give you an idea of what it is that the customer sees and some of the benefits that we get there, specifically around 3D design. So I think that's plenty from me. Andrew, I'll ask you to take back the screen share if you don't mind. I think we've got a few support resources that we wanted to advertise, and we can start going through some of the questions. Hopefully there's a few that we can answer.
Thanks so much for that, George. Really thorough. We are going through questions. We've been answering a lot during the chat.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'll take a look at some of those that I don't think have been answered. We've got one from Isaac. Solargraf has commercial incentives. That's absolutely correct. Yeah, we support also the federal ITC, the MACA's bonus depreciation. Again, we have quite a few users now, so we tend to hear about these things pretty quick. But again, we're very responsive. If you find something that's not there today, we will absolutely get it added for you. We've got a question from Martin. I think that's Martin in Switzerland. Is the software able to place 200 kilowatt systems? Yes, absolutely. It's a really good point. So Solargraf is primarily designed for residential and I would say small commercial systems. You think about the N-phase commercial micros, they're generally intended for relatively small systems, schools, churches, and so on. Solargraf is designed for all of that. It's not necessarily optimized for utility scale projects. So if you are looking to design, let's say, a 2 or 3 megawatt system, you may run into some performance issues, but certainly anything in the sort of 300-400 kilowatt range, you'll have no issues at all. Okay. I'm not sure if we had any others. Were there any others, Andrew, that you saw that might require a little bit more?
No, I think we covered majority of the questions there. Another one from Isaac here. Looking to know more about the PSA using new panels versus old panel settings.
Oh, yeah. I think that's probably, PCS. Yeah, definitely. So essentially, Isaac, one of the problems that we've heard from installers, especially in the US, is people are required, the PV system that's being designed has quite a large current that's pushing out, and the existing main panel cannot handle that current. So you're left with essentially a choice. Either you design a smaller system, which may not be ideal, because you want to be producing a large amount of energy throughout as long a time of the day as you can, or you can upgrade the main panel, but that's quite expensive. There's quite a lot of labor costs involved in that, and it can kind of skew some of the financials of the project. So Enphase in general have worked on a solution that allows you to design a relatively large system that can produce a good amount of power for a long period of the day, but doesn't require you to actually upgrade the main panel. And the way we do that is using something called power control systems. So what it basically says is, at the very peak of the day when your production is highest and the sun's directly above, we will essentially curtail that peak. So you won't get 100% of your production at 2 p.m. or whatever time it is. You might lose a small amount of production, like we saw 2% in today's demo. But what that means is you can still have a relatively large system. So at 10 a.m. or at 4 p.m., you're still producing much more than you would with a small system. And you're avoiding that several $1,000s cost to replace the main panel. So that's a feature that is, I believe, specific to Enphase systems. And that's a setting that you can configure the hardware to respect. And we can now mimic that in Solargraf accurately. Hopefully that helps.
Another one from Karen. Does Solargraf help in applying connection agreements with hydro companies for our customers? So we have e-signature capabilities, but I think that's where it extends. You'll be able to put the documentation to be signed, but we're not going to go. We're not able to get the application going for you or your clients.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, I'm not entirely sure what specific agreement we're talking about, but yeah, Solargraf has a document templates module, which allows you to upload any PDF of any document or contract you want, and you can place onto that blank document certain placeholders. So you could say, put the customer's name here, put the system size there, put the utility company there. And then when you generate that contract inside a project, it just inherits all the data from that project, pre-populates it for you, and then you can execute that through DocuSign. So in terms of getting the data out of Solargraf onto that PDF, we can do that, but actually getting the document to the partner, not so much. Isaac was asking as well about PCS. Can we remove that later on? I'm certain you can. I mean, it's not something I've worked on certainly on the hardware side, but as I understand, it's really just a software setting of the hardware. So at any moment you could disable PCS and go and upgrade the main panel. Yeah.
And one other question from Dev was, can we build 3D models on top of blueprints?
Yeah, absolutely. I will try and find if we have a YouTube video on that. We have quite a few videos on our YouTube channel that look at some of those, let's say, not an edge case, but, you know, less typical cases. But the short answer is absolutely. The only difference I would mention when you're working with a third-party image, a custom image that you've uploaded, such as a blueprint or a drone image, is the algorithms that give us the pitch of the roof will only work with images we supply with Google and Nearmap because they're trained on those images. So if I upload a blueprint of a house that isn't yet built, even if there is LiDAR data available, Solargraf can't determine what the pitch of the roof is. This hasn't really proved to be a problem because if it's new construction and you've got blueprints, presumably you know already the pitch of the roof, so you would just define that manually.
Great.
We had a question from Deb. Any integrations available yet for TPO providers? Yeah, there's quite a lot of work happening at the moment on this. I can't remember exactly who we're officially integrated with today. I think we're working with people like Goodleap, Enfin, Lightreach. I know they do accept our designs. They've kind of certified that they're happy with our values. I don't think we have a direct integration with Lightreach just yet, but we'll follow up and get you the exact details for all the partners that we're working with for TPO.
Right. So Lightreach, Everbright, Enfin on the TPO for PPA lease options are available as well. But it's more an acceptance of our numbers more than a direct integration currently.
Yeah. All right, we've got a few more questions from Martin. Planning versus installation and running. If the hardware will not work or the weather or other issue, I'll have you an overview of the installation. Not quite sure the nature of the question there, Martin. It might be more effective for you and I to chat after today's call. I'll try and dig up your email and we can get on a call.
Yeah, and I did, for everybody still here, I posted I'm sharing the screen here. So we would appreciate if you're looking for a further demo or a one-on-one call where we could deep dive with our reps and go through Solargraf. Please go to solargraf.com. You could register through there, pick a time that works for you. We'll have a one-on-one meeting. We can answer more questions and hopefully activate an account, work together, get you working with Solargraf. We appreciate you, Martin.
Not a problem. Your English is much better than my German, don't worry.
All right. You're doing great. So we have a couple more minutes. Any other questions? Anybody want to throw anything in here? Feel free. Again, just to clarify, I saw it come up a couple times. We are going to send an email, follow-up email with a recording here and links to our website and reviews. So look out for that. So I think what Martin's referring to is like what our estimates are compared to what is actually going to be in effect. So of course, like you said, Martin, I mean, there's always going to be circumstances where there's different cases that initiate variables where it might not be exactly 100%. If you give a client a proposal that says their production for a year is going to be 10,000 kilowatts, it might be a little more, a little less. That's every software out there is going to have a variable.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that. We've looked at this a lot recently. The weather varies from year to year, so it is very difficult for us to say exactly what the production is going to be for 2025 or any particular day this year. However, we've spent a lot of time assessing our production numbers versus real production numbers for similar sites in Enlighten. Obviously, being Enphase, we have access to a huge database of real production numbers coming every day. We've also compared Solargraf with some of the other design tools that are available, and we found that we are within, if everything's designed properly, we're within 2 or 3% on a large number of designs, and we generally see that the weather varies at least 2 or 3%. Year on year, so we're pretty happy with that delta. Again, we've had a lot of incentive people, financing companies. We've spoken to CEC, NREL here in the US, a lot of different bodies who've tried to verify that our shading numbers are correct, that our production numbers are correct. So far, no one who has approached us or who we have approached has declined to certify those numbers. So everyone we've spoken to has given it essentially a rubber stamp. Either they've given it that or they're still in the process, but no one has turned around and said, we don't like your numbers, they're not accurate. And we're very happy to be in that position because it's a lot of work to get there.
Dev, yes, so if you have Solargraf already, the first thing that you'll see when you start a proposal is to create a design or to order a proposal. And the difference would be that you're initially filling out a form with your materials and what your target offset will be. And that'll put in the order, which my team will take over from there. So it skips the whole design portion of it. And I could give you a call. We could set up a time to review that if that's something that you want your reps to use more often. I'll check in with you. Sounds good. Thanks, Martin. All right, great. We have another minute or two. Any last questions? Yeah, thank you. Thanks everybody for being here today. We really appreciate it. We host, I think we're doing a webinar almost once a month now, so feel free to join any others. We have a few that'll target individual features. We have some that show all of Solargraf, so feel free to join them even if you've been on one or two in the past. There's always something new to learn. Again, thanks, George, for your time today. And everybody will send out the email with the recording and we'll reach out. Feel free to log on to solargraf.com, book a time and a demo, and you'll speak with our team directly. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.